So does that mean, that
Yes,
means we go ahead?
Yep, you can go ahead, Joel. Thank you.
Okay. Well, can you let me know whether you can see that PowerPoint deck? We're all good?
We got it.
And one of the things I'm not so certain of is, even though this looks huge on my screen when I'm sharing with you, is it legibly large enough, the letters there and so on? You can see it for the most part? I haven't become some insert
That looks fine, Joel.
Okay, great, thank you. So 14 times in a row, thank you so much for having me over to Lewis County for the first time virtually, but this is the first presentation of one of our annual surveys that we've done since March 3rd, Tuesday, March 3rd last year when we did this. And then of course, the world changed. And so we are rolling out today the Lewis County results, and you will see there is some reference to Jefferson and St. Lawrence in there like usual, but different than other years. All three counties were surveyed the last weekend of October. We postponed the April Jefferson County study, the June or July St. Lawrence County study, and then we thought, let's try to at least get them in the same calendar year. So we did all three of them last October. And even though Larry will be, and hopefully you can see on the panelists that there's Larry Danforth that works with me, and Andy Draper, who's increasingly working with us at the college. And I think Andy came over last year to the presentation. In any event, they will be rolling out later in March, the Jefferson County results, and then I believe that what we have scheduled is the first week of April, the St. Lawrence County results. So this is the first group that we rolled out. The plan that I'm in there, me, different coat on tonight, different shirt, no tie, and Larry. And thank you for having us here. And as always, I would like to acknowledge the folks who are generous in sponsorship to the college, how we can afford to do this and underwrite everything, the costs inherent with all of the data collection and analysis that we do. So the college supports us, and Car Freshener almost 2 decades ago gave a generous donation to the college that they earmarked for the center, and we use the proceeds from that each year as our endowment fund to try to offset costs. And then your generous contribution annually, along with the Community Foundation and Development Authority, make it where we can do these types of things. So thank you to all of them and to you specifically. There are the 3 things I'm going to talk about today. Very quickly, the what was a study, because most of you have heard this before, just one slide. Very quickly, how did we do it? Some things are slightly different this year. Really interesting, cool stuff to Larry, Andy, and I. Maybe not so much to you. Ryan, I see you're muted, but can you let me know, are people able to and encouraged to unmute and pop in a question at any point in time?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so then I'd encourage all of you that if there's something that I mentioned that is new and different there and you're curious at that point in time, don't take a risk that you forget 20 minutes from now and wait for the end. Don't feel like you're interrupting at all. So what was the study this year? We ended up having 8 sections of survey questions that we reported in the study, a 9th if you reference the self-test I'm going to finish with. So what I'd like you to kind of focus on is when I get to the findings, you will see 8 different things and I'm going to pick the highlights of. So we had 7 quality of life survey questions. That's what that 7 means. And we had 8 personal opinion issues in our society questions. And then we had about 5 or 6 COVID related ones. I chose what I thought was a highlight out of each one of these sections. If there's something else that you'd like to talk about, I can quickly, let me just show you if I leave PowerPoint quick, I have the PDF sitting right there and there's the whole report. So it's even quicker than me walking across your courtroom and hitting someone with the laser pointer and then trying to figure out, am I advancing or going front or back in this PowerPoint deck? I should be much more capable managing my own laptop doing this. So at any point in time, if you want to, feel free to say, well, what about that question about safety on the trails or something like that? So that's the framework of what we investigated, those sections of questions. Many of these came from input from your county leadership, Ryan, Eric Berkler, and other folks that I'm sure you spoke with. As we looked at some of the questions about your trail system, you can see number 6. As we looked at the potential legalization of recreational marijuana use in New York State, opinions about growth and sales in York County, and as we looked at the internet access and so on, those are clearly created by and driven by the local leadership, you folks. So the next one is how. And this is where there's a slide that's different that Larry and I and Andy are really proud of. That as usual, we have about 25 core questions that we trend. You'll see many of them tonight. As usual, we have about 15 to 20 new questions that we ask each year that are relevant. As usual, it was the last week of October that we did the interviewing. And I would say a little bit larger than usual, but not all that uncommon. We had just short of 500 adult participants, which continues to amaze me given that there are only 27,000 folks who live in your county, of which about 20,000 of them are eligible participants being 18 or older. And we get almost 500 out of those 20,000. It's just a great testament to your folks are interested in the value of data and interested in participating. So this is what we use as our methodology. We did 189 were via landline they were on that we called when we talked to them. 69 were on their cell phone and 216 were on email, were respondents to a random selection of email addresses that we sent an invitation. Those are the ones that add up to the 474. What was so different this time is obviously in October, our college was not, we were completely remote at our college. There was no way that we could follow social distancing. And you can see this is a former student of mine, Taylor, up here in our call center that still exists in downtown Watertown, but that's not what we used. We created a virtual call center that looked a lot like you guys tonight. So you can see me right there and Larry right there. And all these are our students with their cell phones up to their ear using Google Voice burner numbers, calling from wherever they were that they could be peaceful. And in the entire time, we're supervising and monitoring every phone conversation that they were doing. So we created a virtual remote call center this year. And honestly, I can see that being one example of an outcome of the pandemic is going to end up being consistently and probably quite permanently applied for us in the future. It's much easier to manage our workforce, much easier to get more people involved, and much easier, honestly, for us to be able to supervise and more cost efficient for us to be able to do a virtual call center. So that's how we did it. Our margin of error is about plus or minus 5% on the study this year. So any statistic you see with, here's the end of the study, we start with findings. Here's the end of my presentation, I should say. So when I look at this one, you can see this year we had 7 quality of life indicators that we asked on the same excellent, good, fair, poor scale that we have for 14 years now. And all I did is sort them by order of most positive satisfaction level. So you can see quality of the environment, quality of the K-12 education. These are the ones that had the highest dark blue bar that was excellent. And if you take dark blue and light blue and draw the line over here where my cursor is, you can see for the first 4, it was a large majority that indicated at least excellent or good. Not surprising to us. I guess the most surprising thing or the most unknown thing to Larry and I as we did this in October was the last time we did it in October 2019, our sample selected, most of us had not even heard of, definitely me, had not even heard of COVID-19. So is it going to be the case that the residents of Lewis County are going to be much less happy with, these are our quality of life indicators? And the answer to that question was no. No, most of these results were very consistent with past times that we've measured these 7 attributes. You can see the bottom 2 had to do with local economy and jobs. And these 5 were more of the less economic related quality of life indicators. And this is figure 9 out of the full study. And nothing was shocking there to us. They lined right up in a similar order that they had in other years that we had done this. Now, I'm going to take a brief moment here in the next couple slides. You can see this is findings.1. And this is still findings.1. And let me just prove to you that I wasn't just making all that up, what I was just saying to you there. If you look, for example, of quality of the environment, this is the excellent or good rate, 83, 89, 90, 90, 90. Look at all the way across those 14 years, at 86% this year. Very typical. If you look at healthcare quality, it's been lower, it's been higher, very typical. The dark gray cells are, I picked out of there the highest rating. So quality of the environment, the most positively it's ever been assessed in your county was in 2012. And what I want you to recognize is none of these were the most positive ever rated. They were all very typical. And then when you look at the bottom of this slide, what you can see is we picked the other end of the spectrum and picked, this is the rates of indicating it was poor. And what you can see is one of them, quality, healthcare quality. 11%. It's still only 11%, 1 out of every 9 participants. But that 11% is at the highest rate that we've ever found. None of the others, not even in this time when we know we're all feeling an economic pinch in our country. It still was not the case that the availability of good jobs, you can see that 27% indicated that it was poor. But look at what the rates have been in some earlier years, as high as 48, and I have the controls right in the way right now, so I can't see, as high as 57 back in 2011. 57% of the folks we talked to back then said the availability of good jobs was poor. This past October, it was only half that rate. So no one's saying that's a great thing to brag about. 1 out of every 4 people feels that the availability of good jobs in Lewis County is poor. But putting some perspective on it. The perspective right now is longitudinally trending. So that is throughout the study. I'm not going to bother you with it again later. I just want to let you know it's in the report. Notice this is still findings.1. Because I'm looking now, I've grabbed the one question out of there, the quality of K-12 education. So notice those green numbers. That's everybody, all 474, the 31.9%. The 46.4%. So if you add those up, you get 78, 79%. If I go back a slide, that's where that 79%, right? I guess it rounded to 78% for the quality of K-12 education. But what we've done for every single question on the survey, and I know you've seen this in past years, is we've cross-tabbed it by, do the genders feel differently? Do different annual income households feel differently about the quality of K-12 education? You know, if I slide my cursor along there, it's quite irrefutable that those folks who are from lower income households are clearly less likely to feel that K-12 education right now is excellent than those folks up here in the higher incomes. And then you look at the age groups, and you look at your education level, and then you look at political ideology. I can remember last year, a year ago tonight, we looked a whole lot at some of the blue, red, purple, which I haven't built that into this year's PowerPoint deck. But I want you to realize this is just the one time, this is the only crosstab in the entire report for you to realize that when you have the time to look at the entire report, if you have the interest to look that deeply, every single question in the survey has been crosstabbed by each one of these 5 factors. So one more, focusing on that idea of quality of K-12 education. We also, as I mentioned 10 minutes ago, we surveyed in each of the other 2 counties at the same time. And I thought this was noteworthy. There is no question in my mind, over time and compared to the other counties, your folks in your county are happy with the quality of the education, the K-12 they get. And even though, as you know, things have gone remote, even though, you know, things have extracurricular activities like sports and arts and so on have been restricted, it certainly says to me, especially relative to the other 2 counties, your folks in your county value what's going on in the K-12 education system. And the 5, or is it 6? I'm not sure which it is, school districts that are in Lewis County. So I threw down here at the bottom, and I hope I don't have a typo. I didn't have anybody proofread this, but I'm certainly hoping that you would recognize this is table 15 in the entire report when you do take the time to look. So that's the first finding. And now what I'm going to do is transition from the quality of life indicator section to, hopefully you would remember, these are questions where we've asked statement A, statement B. If you wanted to see exactly what the wording was on statement A and statement B, I could quickly stop the PowerPoint and show you that page in the report. But we asked something about gun control and gun rights. We asked something for the first time ever about systemic racism and social injustice. The phrasing of statement A and B was, it's a major problem in our society that should be addressed, versus it's not a major problem in our society that should be addressed. As you look down this graph, what I want you to recognize is the idea of, I put gun control and gun rights first, because that is by far 75% of the people chose statement A, which was that, I'm going to butcher it here. Our Second Amendment rights should be protected, and it's not necessary to have laws like the New York State SAFE Act. As compared to statement B was the reverse of that. 75% was the largest most dominant response we got. The next most dominant one was people agreeing that systemic racism and social injustice is a major problem in our society, is the way it was worded, not in Lewis County necessarily, but in our society. The next most dominant one was 61% of the participants. I guess I didn't sort it correctly here because this was the one about President Trump. Now remember, this was a week before the election day when we sampled it. So it wasn't former President Trump, it was President Trump. Good for our country, bad for our country. It's been all 3 years we've done this, roughly a 2-to-1 ratio. These are statistically significant differences. And there has been no trend or dramatic change in people's attitude about climate change as proven science versus its exaggerated speculation. And then we asked each of the, whoops, sorry, I'm trying to slide down when I rolled on. We asked about same-sex relationships amongst consenting adults. We asked pro-life versus pro-choice. We asked responsibility for healthcare is a government responsibility or an individual responsibility. And the only one that if you look at the different A versus B bars, that is not a statistically significant difference. In other words, which one is a virtual tie was attitudes about, it was the US government should build a physical wall along the entire US-Mexico border, which is still the most likely response, but it's not statistically significantly. That 49 and that 46 are not statistically significantly different. The other 7 that are above, there is a dominant opinion in your county. Now, what's the blue and red? Again, it's quite irrefutable if you follow the platforms of the conservative and liberal stances. All I did was choose the color that is clearly pro-gun rights, is more of a conservative stance, and pro-gun control is more of a moderate stance. Clearly, systemic racism and social injustice is a major problem, is more of the moderate stance, and it's not a major problem, is more of the conservative stance. And all I did is go through and highlight them for you. So I could take questions out, I could wait and take questions at the end. I'm looking at you, Ryan, because you must be a co-host and you're at the top of my little gallery view here. Keep going or stop.
I'm good. I don't have any questions, but the legislators might be interested.
While they're thinking about that, let me just show you the next slide is the same thing, just slightly different. What is the difference here? The difference here is, remember, their responses were strongly A, somewhat A, neither A or B, somewhat B, or strongly B. And my point behind this is now I've taken them and shaded them by intensity. So this would have been strongly climate change is exaggerated speculation. And this would have been, I somewhat agree, it's exaggerated speculation. This would have been, I somewhat agree, it's proven science. And this is, I strongly agree. And the reason I show this display is I want you to recognize the darkish colors. Very much people, if they tend to say A or B, were strongly in it. You can see that the lighter colors in the middle are smaller slices. I mean, look at the President Trump good versus bad one. Over here, the red is saying he's good, 64%. And guess what? If you think he's good, you strongly felt he's good. Look over here. This is the, I think he's in general bad for the country. Look at dark blue versus light blue. There's no question. We almost didn't even need to ask the somewhat versus strongly, because it's so predictable that if you say one or the other, you're probably quite convicted in your opinion on it. So no new information on this one other than that blue word I put right there. Taking a look at the intensity. In fact, take a look at the bottom one. The gun. This is, in fact, I feel obligated because I know I butchered it. Let me take a quick moment. It won't take me long if I can go to here and show you. I know right where the page is. It's page 34 of the study. And I feel really bad that I was butchering that because I don't have them memorized. Let me make it bigger where you can even possibly read it. Statement A, the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution protects an individual's right to own guns, and that should not be compromised by laws such as New York State SAFE Act. Statement B is gun violence in the United States is out of control, and some gun regulations similar is necessary. And so notice the A is the pro-gun rights one. And when you look at this, you can see that if someone does say A, which 75% of the people down here did, it's very, very likely 63% of them said strongly A. I believe that. So I mentioned to Channel 7 today, and I think it's true, and Larry and Andy will have the chance to pipe in at the end as we kind of swap the microphone over to them. This has been really interesting from a sociological and scientific point of view to better understand a community. I don't think any one of us believes that this is some type of giving you an agenda saying you should vote this way or vote that way. But the scientists and professors in us are saying we are all going to be healthier in a community if we understand the attitudes, opinions, and perceptions in our community. However, that said, we have measured these for, let me show you the next slide. There's the responsibility for healthcare, government responsibility or individual responsibility. Now, this is going across the 3 years we've done it, 2018, 19, and 20. I picked this one because this is one of the few that actually did show a change. Notice in 2018, only 26% of the people said it's an individual's responsibility for their own healthcare, health insurance. That almost doubled to 45% this year. But many of them, there hasn't been much change. The whole idea of pro-gun control versus pro-gun rights versus pro-gun control. So what we've decided as a research institute is to basically carve out these questions, set them aside maybe for a year, and refocus on things that are more local. Maybe more of the same types of issues, but are now issues that are debated by our New York State Assembly and our New York State Senate, and even you folks on the Lewis County Legislature. So we're going to be leaning on Ryan, leaning on other folks like you, that if there are certain state-centric things, rather than, Supreme Court federal-centric things, we want you to let us know what would be good for 2 points of view. One, to better understand the community and their satisfactions, their preferences, their support, their opposition. But also number two, it could be ones that you pick that, as you'll see later, we have some on trails. We have some on the idea of promoting growth of marijuana if it becomes legal to do so in your county, to grow and profit from it. Those are things that you may be asked at some point to be the decision makers on it. So we would like it. We'd very much prefer if we ask questions that are helpful for you to do your job. And I want you to know that we recognize that you may not have a vote in anything about building a wall on the US-Mexico border. You may not have a vote on Roe v. Wade or something like that. But I still don't think, we as scientists don't think that it's a bad thing to have an understanding of our community. So that's why those have been in there, but they're probably going to take a little break. Now, by the way, I said 3 changes right here. So to summarize, there is no question that is a statistically significant change. Remember, plus or minus 4.8%. I can't tell you why, but I can tell you what. I can say what has happened is in the last 2 years, maybe it was the messaging, maybe it was one of them was an election, presidential election fall, one of them wasn't. I don't know what the reason is, but what I can tell you is clearly this fall, we had much more sentiment from your adult residents that healthcare is the responsibility of the individual, not the government. And notice what it was. It was way more a shift from no preference to there. The idea of what percent of the people say it's a government responsibility did not change that much. But what you can see is that side did change. Second one, that US-Mexico border one, we're now, I don't know if you remember, 5 minutes ago, I said that 49 versus 46 is not statistically significantly different in this year. But notice what it was last year. Last year, it was 59 to 31, build a wall. That's a statistically significant change in a year amongst the attitudes of Lewis County adults. It went down to only 49% saying build it and up to 46% saying don't build it. Again, I don't know why, but I can tell you what. And then the third one that changed is that intensity and the support for gun control was already high 2 years ago, 61 to 33. It became higher last year, 68 to 28. And as I mentioned, it is the most dominant of the personal issue opinions that we measured, 75 to 24. And I think I threw it in there. I couldn't resist. These same things, healthcare, gun control, check out the other counties. I mean, I already showed, look at how it is no question, Lewis County adults relative to the other 2 counties are most likely to say, protect my Second Amendment rights. And Lewis County adults relative to the other 2 counties. These were all surveyed right at the same time. with the same methodology are least likely to say it's a government responsibility and more likely than the other two to say it's an individual responsibility. So even though these other two counties have not been rolled out yet, as I mentioned, Larry's going 2 weeks from tonight to the Jefferson County Board of Legislature, just like this, and doing it. We can't help but help you better understand your results. We can't help but refer to the other two counties. So the remaining findings go much more quickly because I don't have all of these ones we've done over time. In April 2020, right when the pandemic started, that's when we created this virtual call center. And our very first shot of surveying was partnering with the 3 public health departments, Jefferson, Lewis, and St. Lawrence, and they created these questions. And we asked questions about your satisfaction with response to COVID, your perceived severity of the COVID as a pandemic. Even back then, we asked questions about your emotional health, your financial health, your physical health, and some behaviors. Of all the information on this graph, here's where I would focus if I were you. We asked, I don't know if you can see my pointer, I hope you can. 1, 2, 3, 4 different satisfactions. What changes here is the first one was the Center for Disease Control, the US Public Health. The second one was President Trump and the US government. The third one was Governor Cuomo and the New York State government. And then the fourth one was right in your county, the Lewis County Public Health. What do I notice out of here? Satisfaction with response to COVID diminished between April and October for the CDC's response. Satisfaction with response to COVID diminished as well with President Trump and the US government's response. Satisfaction most dramatically decreased with satisfaction with Governor Cuomo and the New York State response. But look what happened. Same people surveyed within the same instrument, within the same interview, at the same time, of course. This made me smile, and I would think it would make you smile as well. At the same point in time, they said, but you know what? Our Lewis County Public Health's response to it, they're more satisfied now than they were in April. That stood out at me. Now, the other thing that stood out off this graph, in April, 11% said COVID is a major problem, worst in the past. In October, that went from 11 up to 16. In April, 77% said COVID's a major problem, worst yet to come, and that decreased down to 51%. Kind of makes sense. But this one was a bit surprising to us. The rate that believe COVID is not even a major problem doubled between April and October, from 9% to 19%. This is what, Ashley Waite and Steve Jennings and Ginger Hall and Dana McGuire, the local public health directors, are looking at and saying, clearly, if I had to pick out of these 4 groups, who is it most likely they would trust? Us. They're the ones that they're most satisfied with. So that the public health messaging, they feel like really needs to come out of the local group if they want people to believe it and potentially follow it behaviorally and so on. So we will not be following up, I don't think, and asking these questions again in the future. This was more of a response to the local public health departments. And I thought it was quite telling how you saw the direction of change as people are getting 6 months into and worn out by this pandemic. There's one group that it's still, they increased in their satisfaction with it. So that's finding 3. Finding 4 was, this is just one question. I know that might look big and cluttered and ugly, but this is one single question we've been asking ever since the second year of your study. And I've asked this so much, I know this one. In the last 12 months, has you and your family's personal financial situation gotten better, stayed the same, or gotten worse? I believe, and I think you can quote me on this one, we stole this from Zogby International back in 2008. They were asking the same question. So look at last year. It was probably the most positive distribution of results we'd ever gotten, green versus blue. Green is better, blue is worse. People were twice as likely. It was fat and sassy financial time. It was October, COVID hadn't hit yet. I think we would all be shocked if that stayed the same a year later, given what we've had, and the impact upon small businesses and furloughing and layoffs and so on. So what happened is it's reversed. But this is the way I want to frame it for you, Mr. Burns. is 14% said better. 1 out of every 7 people in October said, my personal financial situation has gotten better. Who knows? Maybe they own stock in Amazon, or own stock in Zoom. There are some winners throughout this financially, there's no question, in this pandemic, but 23% said it's gotten worse. So look at the change in the last year, but I want you to look at that 1423 and slide to the left with me. This is back during the recession, 1240, 1134, 1230. There's no question that people are feeling the pain worse than what they were in the preceding 3 or 4 years, but it hasn't gotten as personal financial situation desperate or feeling that the change has been bad as what we saw back during the recession years. Interesting, again, the way that you frame and take a look at the motion picture of this, not just a snapshot of 2020. That was findings 4. Finding 5 is, I almost want to let this green graph right there just speak for itself. And like me be quiet. The question, I can't. The question that we posed, our students posed, is what direction are things heading? Now, I know there's not a specific definition of things, but this is the way the question's asked globally. That's the most common way it's asked. What direction would you say that you believe things are headed in Lewis County? So no question, from last year, the first time we asked it, to this year, there was a drop in the likelihood to say right direction and an increase in the likelihood to say wrong direction. But how would I interpret this? They're still way more likely to say, you folks in Lewis County, they're way more likely to say you have things going in the right direction than wrong. And you might say, oh, you just got a whole bunch of real happy people on the phone. Well, if that's the case, then why did those happy people say this about the whole country? This is the same group of people. And there was a drop in 42% a year ago said the entire country is going in the right direction. It dropped to 32. And what I see is an incredible change in that we're now, there is no question. Your local people are happier with the direction they see things are going in your county than they are the way that they see things going in the entire country. So you might say, well, that's just human nature. That's just natural. That happens everywhere. Well, I want you to look down at the bottom right graph. If it happened everywhere, this is the current set of results in the 3 counties. Then why is it that yours are 49-23 and St. Lawrence County are 36-34? It's not happened everywhere, that you're just happy where you live. And what I could do is go grab the one that shows for the country too. But I just wanted to show that relative to the other 2 counties, the optimism of going the right direction was highest in your county. There's your trail system, your questions. I copied and pasted exactly what you gave me. Green is agree, blue is disagree. People far more likely to agree than disagree that your motorized trails are safe. People are almost twice as likely to agree rather than disagree that there's adequate law enforcement presence on the county's motorized trail system. Given that, they still are more likely to agree than disagree that more people would utilize it if it were safer. Even though they said we think they are safe, probably if they were even more safe, I guess is what they're saying there. And then finally, we switched from motorized to the hiking and walking trails, and it was a question about the signage, the well-marked. Now, I have no idea how you implement these or what committee this came from, but I know that we've measured those 4 things, and hopefully they will be helpful to you at some point in time and in some way.
Hey, Joel, the one thing, if you dig into the tabs on that, the older residents feel that the trail system is less safe. So
the first item right there. So let me just, it's Ryan's fault, not mine, like usual. Let me just quickly go to here.
It's on page 59.
Oh, you even got the page for me. Page 50. How close did I hit? Oh, there's the marijuana questions. So page 59, what Ryan is saying is right here. So there's the motorized trails, and here's what he's saying. I agree that they're safe. And he was talking about is a function of age, right?
Yep.
So the younger folks are 73% say, I think they're safe, whereas it goes down to about half in the other two age groups. Is that what you were saying there?
Yeah, same with the
By
law
characterizing
enforcement. Same with the law enforcement question. The older people are looking for more representation on the trails than the younger people.
Gotcha. Don't disagree. I don't disagree. So, so let me just toggle back here and get to, because we're up to slide 20 already. So we're almost there, ready for, I'm staying as closer than usual with the timing on this, to be able to open it up for questions. So finding dot 6 is the Lewis County Trail System. These were the two questions that, I mean, I copied and pasted specifically. Would you support or oppose the sale of marijuana in, you know, Jefferson, Lewis, or St. Lawrence County? And there's no question that in your county, it was roughly 43-43. They're equally divided in support versus opposition. And it looks different than the other two counties to me, clearly by more than plus or minus a 4.8%. So this is the idea of, it's about half and half if you take the people who will make a decision versus saying, I don't support or oppose, or I'm not sure. 43-43. Whereas in St. Lawrence County, it's almost a 3-to-1 ratio here. I'm more likely to say I support the sale of it. That's the operating word there. The next follow-up question was, would you support or oppose allowing farmers to grow and profit from this new industry? And in both of these questions, it said, if it were to become legal, was the preface before it. And I want you to notice that even though there's less support in your county than the other two for allowing farmers to grow it, it still now becomes, this isn't 43-43 anymore. This is now 54-32, where, you know, a pretty clear summary would be there's more support for allowing farmers to grow and profit from it than there is support for the actual sale of it in your county. And you can see that type of trend happens in all three counties. Jefferson, 59% supported sale, went up to 68. Your county, 43%, went up to 54. St. Lawrence County, 61, went up to 71. That common theme happens in all three. But there's no question the level of support overarching this is lower in your county than the other two. And then finally, findings dot 8, we asked people, this was partnering with the Development Authority in the North Country. I'm sure all of you are familiar with that. ECC is the acronym, the initials for the consultant who was doing the broadband access survey in each of the three counties, where you actually went on, you clicked, they did a speed test and all that. Well, they asked us to ask a couple of questions on our survey as well. And this first question was, do you access the internet at home via? And so people could choose all that apply. And what do I focus on there? Only 3% said I don't access the internet at all from home. 97% said at least one of these choices, with the most common one being via a cable TV modem. And then what they were very interested in is working and learning remotely from home. And you can see the folks who we surveyed, 1 out of every 5, 22% said someone in my household is working remotely from home using the internet. 1 out of every 4 said someone, at least one person in my household is going to school at home at the K-12 level. And 1 out of every 7 said someone in my household is going to school, college from home. These would be great ones. So let me just take a quick look at this working remotely, kind of a Ryan Pichet question, where he said, look at the tabs. So if I quit, wouldn't you suspect that probably working remotely from home, it's going to be, if you looked at the younger age group, it's going to be a much higher rate than 22%, because you have all of these retirees who are not working remotely from home because they're not working. So I'll resist the temptation to go to those crosstabs there. And what I want to finish with is this. If you looked at the cover of our, I don't know if you noticed the cover of our report, it was on my first slide. I put an editorial comment on there in a way that I never have in 20 years of doing this. And we're probably going to pick a one phrase kind of tagline that we put on the cover of, if somebody asked me what's the #1 most important thing to me that comes out of a study that we do, I would have to say that once every 4 years at the Center for Community Studies, once every 4 years at Siena, Marist, at Fox News polls, at Gallup, at Pew, once every 4 years, we get a chance to test, is our methodology working? Because you see, 4 years ago in 2016, when there was a presidential election, we were using different methodology back then to survey people. We were only doing telephones. We have changed in these 4 years. And how can I show a PowerPoint presentation like this to folks like you and me feel like I'm disseminating the truth if I don't test my methodology? So what we did is this. In each of the 3 counties, we decided, since it was October, it was the last week before a presidential election. What we did is we measured, and what I'm reporting here is we asked people, if the election were today, classic question, would you vote for Trump, vote for Biden, a different candidate, or in October, people could still say, I'm undecided. So what I'll step you through here is, and as you know, within a week or two after the presidential election, there were a whole lot of nationwide, if not international, media sources that said, polling is broken. Will it ever be fixed? So we decided, for better or for worse, to do a self-test and see, are we broken? So pink, at least it looks pink on mine. What that is that's the raw sample. That's our 500 people in Jefferson County. 51% of the people said they would vote for Trump. Here's your county, 56% in our sample. However, because telephone and online methodology clearly overrepresents women, overrepresents older women, overrepresents older, highly educated women at a rate higher than what the historical rate has been on election day turnout, we weighted the data. So I want you to notice pink to maroon is we weighted the data before election day. On November 3rd, that Tuesday morning, Larry and Andy and I met and said, this is our final prediction. So these bars are what we predicted would have been the rate of support. We predicted in your county that Trump would get 64%. We predicted in Jefferson County he would get 56%. We predicted in St. Lawrence County he would get 53%. So election night, I watched the news just like you watched the news. And I said, whoa, we were way off. If you look at the light gray bars, those are what were reported the night of the election, November 3rd. And as we all know now, it takes a while in Lewis County. It takes a while in Jefferson County. It takes a while in Georgia. It takes a while everywhere to count the absentee ballots. So what happened is that's the percent in your county election night, which was early voting and day of voting, but no absentee ballots counted yet. Trump had 73%. And I thought, oh my God, we missed by 10 points. Well, by the time they counted all the absentee ballots, that's the certified result. We missed by 4 points some in your county. We missed by 56 to 58, 2 points in Jefferson County. I'm comparing maroon to gray, dark gray. And in St. Lawrence County, 53 to 55, we missed by 2 points. So here is what we did, is we put ourselves to a self-test, because if we missed by 25%, then why should we be doing studies for anybody else? Our methodology or our mathematics is definitely screwed up. So we put ourselves to a self-test. I can't even address why some other pollsters may have missed by more. All I can address is I know how we do it. And I know that dark maroon was our projection, dark gray was the real result. And this is the size of the margin of error, as I said, in your county, because there's fewer likely voters. This is why it's not 4.8% anymore. It's plus or minus 6, we missed by 4.8. Jefferson County, the margin of error is plus or minus 5.7, we missed by less. There's the St. Lawrence County. And just for your curiosity, this is the rate in our sample at which they said, if the election were tomorrow, I would vote for Trump. Clearly, he had more support in your county by males. Clearly, he had least support for the lowest income. Clearly, he was quite uniform across the ages. He won resoundingly, or was predicted to win resoundingly in all age groups, other than once you get up to above 70. The more highly educated were the least likely to say that they would vote for Trump, except for that group, and that shouldn't shock you. If someone said I'm a registered Republican, there was an 82% chance they said I'm going to vote for Trump. He almost makes you wonder, what about those other 18%? And if they said I'm a registered Democrat, there was only a 23% chance they said they were going to vote for Trump. And clearly Trump controlled and dominated in the not Republican or Democrat, the independents. So why am I doing this with you? I can't resist, because it was our opportunity once every 4 years to be able to see, does our methodology work? So that next year, if you ask us to survey another question about trails, or a question about who knows what, economic development, education, COVID response and recovery, whatever you want us to survey about, we're confident that there isn't some inherent bias, because we've had this chance to be able to test our methodology. And that's the last thing before you maybe have questions for me. Although, if you don't mind, Ryan, and it can work, I'd like to have Andy or Larry turn on their mic and say, is there anything glaring that I forgot to mention? Are you two guys still there? Or did I whoop you into submission? Can they unmute?
No, I'm still here. I wouldn't say that you missed anything. For you to go and miss something, you'd have to stop talking at some point for 40 minutes straight. And I don't think you did that. So I think you probably hit pretty much everything you were looking for.
I'm on sabbatical this semester, so I don't go to any classes. So I get a chance to actually talk to somebody who stays on Zoom with me and doesn't bail. This is like, all right, I'm sorry. But yeah, Andy and Larry are still going to classes and teaching. I'm off at Syracuse University this semester. How about you, Andy? Is there anything?
Oh, I knew 10 minutes in that we were going to blow by that 25 minutes Ryan gave you. So no, I don't think you missed anything at all.
Well, we still have 10 minutes for questions and answers.
Joel, this is Phil.
Of course. This is awesome.
I probably ask you this every year, but how do you get to that margin of error of 4.8%? How do you arrive at that?
There is a mathematical formula that has to do with bell-shaped curves and distributions. And if you wanted to wrap your brain around it sometime when you're really bored, what it is similar to is the idea of, if you took a coin and you flipped it 100 times, you can't guarantee that you're going to be 50-50 heads and tails, but you can count how many you have. And then if you're really bored, flip it again 100 times, and flip it again 100 times, and flip it again 100 times. And if you did this simulation a whole bunch of times and you wrote down and made a graph for how many do I get, you're going to find that that graph becomes a bell-shaped curve. It's probably going to range in the interval of, very rarely do you get less than 45 out of 100, and very rarely do you get more than 55 out of 100. Well, flipping coins is the same as asking somebody in rabbit ears. There are some differences, but it's similar to asking somebody A versus B. So it's the whole idea of, there's a distribution that's called a probability distribution that underlies it. And it's the same method if you're asking A versus B, or support versus oppose, or male versus female. It's called a binomial variable. And it's what we teach in our math and our stats classes at JCC. Now, all that said, for theory, turns into a little tiny formula that you put in the sample size, and you put in the sample result, and use your calculator, and you come up with, if we only sampled 200, our margin of error would be plus or minus about 7% or 8%. If we sampled 10,000 people, our margin of error would now be only about plus or minus 1%. So it depends upon how many times you sample, how many times you flip the coin.
Gotcha. Thanks.
You're welcome. Cassandra Mosier keeps taking on this different persona. She looks like Frank Pace to me right now. If you don't have any questions, then Ryan's going to summarize.
Well, I have some notes from the report. First of all, our public health response is very impressive, and I think that we need to make sure. I mean, we've done a good job recognizing our folks, but we need to continue to recognize them. One thing that Joel didn't show is the comparison with the other counties. And at 82%, we poll higher than the same question asked in Jefferson and St. Lawrence. So even though we shade slightly more conservative, our folks were more satisfied with our public health response. So I feel that we're graded even more on a curve because of our slightly more conservative folks, and we still did well. The other thing was the right direction, wrong direction. That's probably my favorite question. I think it's something that eventually I'd like to get us to a point where we've got a mission and a vision, a strategic plan, and we should put things like that in our strategic plan, goals to achieve or maintain the community believing that we're headed in the right direction at a rate of 60% or 70%, something we can work on and improve as a measure of how our county government is doing. And then the last thing is the marijuana questions. We asked those questions this year because we're fairly certain that the state legislature through the budget is going to be approving the use of recreational marijuana in Lewis County. So unfortunately, the evidence wasn't exactly conclusive in the polling, but we can use some of this data to help us. We're going to have some big decisions here between now and if it passes 2022 about zoning, about what type of licenses we're going to allow in Lewis County, and hopefully we can use some of this polling data to help inform our decisions. So that was my notes, basically.
Does anyone else have there's Eric Verkler showed up. Hi, Eric Verkler. Please feel free if you have any other questions. And also please feel free that I will email to Cassandra. If I haven't already, I'll email you this PowerPoint deck and the full PDF of the report. The full PDF of the report is going to be available tomorrow morning on our website at JCC. And don't hesitate to shoot me an email. And if you have any deeper questions that you'd like us to drill down into, a lot of that profiling, a lot of that looking at what sorts of people hold which types of attitudes or behaviors or satisfactions or level of support is in there for gender, age, education, income. But you might have a different question, a question of the sorts of people who believe this, do they also tend to believe that? There are many, many other links that could be made that we have, no hesitation at all in providing those as an email response to you, and look forward to continuing to do that in the future. My sabbatical that I'm doing at Syracuse University this semester, I'm learning a whole lot from them, some new software, and I'm working with an epidemiologist who's an expert in wastewater transmission of COVID virus along with other viruses. What they're supposed to be learning from me is they actually, on March 26th, I'm going to be giving them a presentation about Syracuse University should be able to do with their students what we're fortunate enough to be able to do with our students now, because they don't at this point in time. And so I'm going to share with them. And one of the big things I'm going to say is you need to spend the time to build relationships with the leaders in the community like you and the media and all of the other key stakeholders, if you really want to be something that's embraced in your region, as compared to potentially just a profit center that's supposed to make money, which is not what we are at our college. So we thank you for maybe embracing is too strong of a word, but you certainly welcome us every year, and we're thankful for that. So do you want me to stay on, Ryan, or should I hop off because this is the link for your real meeting?
Our real meeting is going to just the same live stream, same Zoom is going to roll right into our 5 o'clock board meeting. So unless you guys are highly interested in Lewis County board